you, Peter, very much for that kind introduction, and Kirchner as well. And the 3-day workshop that's being referred to is the one offered through the African Doctoral Academy. So perhaps afterwards we can share some details about that. That will be the winter school that's happening in July. So welcome, everybody. It's great to see all of you. I'm just going to share my screen, and anything in the way of a thumbs up from anybody when you can see the screen would be very helpful. Thanks very much, Peter. So, yeah, so welcome once again, and it's great to see that there is still quite a lot of interest in attending webinars around various software programs. Of course, Peter had mentioned in his opening that he has had a look at ATLAS.ti's website, and that is a phenomenal claim, the bridge between, was it human expertise and artificial intelligence. I will touch on some of the capabilities of ATLAS.ti in terms of how it works with AI, but my session is largely focused on looking at the functionalities of ATLAS as a tool, and thinking about, and helping you at least to think about how you can use this tool throughout the research process. So we have an hour and a half until 3:30. It's perhaps not nearly enough time to go through everything, but we'll do the best that we can. I think that the way that I have planned the webinar is that it would probably go up. The postgraduate office also has a 3-day workshop. Okay. I have planned for us to use the whole hour and a half. So if there are questions that you have, pop them in the chat. The chat is visible to me, and or feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute at that point, just so that everybody who has a question gets an opportunity to ask it in case I don't leave enough time at the end. All right. So in this webinar, I want to connect you to the resources, trainings, and other trainers. I think just before, or in my planning of these slides, I may have deleted the slide with some of the trainers at SU, but it is available on the website. So it includes myself and Lauren Bilskirts, who is at CREST. And there are a few other trainers as well, all at various levels of training. Of course, if you're joining this session as perhaps a postgraduate student and you're interested in ways in which you could perhaps go about making an extra rand or two, do feel free to be in touch with me about how you can become a trainer for ATLAS.ti. It was probably my, alongside working at Marcel's Frozen Yogurt, it was my more professional academic gig while I was a student. So get in touch if you're interested in learning how to become a trainer. So I'd like to provide you with an overview of the interface and tools, how it can be used throughout the research process, and offer time for questions and comments, which I think might be best to do throughout. All right. So what are some of the frequently asked questions about ATLAS.ti? So what is it? Can it do the coding for me? Why do I need it? Manual coding seems better. And what other software is available? So ATLAS.ti is a software tool. It assists us really in data management and analysis. The more organized and systematic you are in your approach with ATLAS.ti, the better able you're going to be to ask certain questions of the data. So today we'll cover an introduction, which includes the interface and exploring functionalities around working with your documents and document groupings, looking at quotations and coding and the memo function and how you might visualize things in the network view. But as we go through this, what I'd like you to keep in mind is that the way in which you organize and set up ATLAS.ti to work with for a particular project is important, that there is some sort of structure. And in a more advanced training session of ATLAS.ti, we usually cover some of the query tools and query functionalities of ATLAS.ti. And you can only query for something that you've coded for, or a document grouping that you've created. So as you plan your projects and as you plan to engage with ATLAS.ti, just to mention that there is a wealth of online support around ATLAS.ti. What I also really like about Atlas is their tech support. So they, if you're having an issue or you're wanting to connect with them about a problem that you may be having that you can't find a solution for in their manual, online, or anywhere, they're very responsive and very quick to help you with that. So, the term. The acronym is. It's not the most. I think, polite acronym, if I can say it that way, but it's pronounced CACDAS. So it's Computer Assisted Data Analysis Software Tool, which was really interested by Fielding and Lee in 1991. So it's quite a long time ago. And I started working with ATLAS.ti when it was in its version 4.2. So that's quite a while ago. Can it do the analysis for me? So it's no and yes. So in the past, if I was giving this seminar, as little as 4 or 5 years ago, it would still be very much no. Things have certainly changed in the face of AI. And tools like ATLAS.ti, which Stellenbosch University has a license for, and NVivo, which is the software that's used at UCT, for example, both of them are owned by Lumivero. And both are also very focused. Both tools are very focused on how you can optimize on your analysis using AI functionalities. As you can imagine, there is, of course, a debate in the literature around the use of AI in analysis. So, we're all very much aware of the conversations around AI use in higher education. Kirshner and I were talking before the seminar about the workshop he held yesterday around AI use, and very much focused on the university's current policy around it, which is not that, it's not allowed at all, but it's around how we're using it and transparency about how we're using it. And certainly, for those of you who are publishing as researchers, you will know that that transparency around AI use needs to be declared, and there is some level of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable AI use, at least in terms of research, for example. And one of those things is especially around the use of AI for qualitative data analysis. And it is certainly really problematic if researchers are uploading their participants' interview data. So it's different if you're using AI for transcription purposes, right? So programs like Descript and so on, where you might upload your interview recording and it can, assist with the transcription. That many of the transcription software programs do have a kind of tiered subscription model, or have like a free trial period that you can use. So, to build the transcripts, that can be really useful. Lots of students and researchers also use Teams as an online platform to do their interviews and record the interviews, also to have an initial transcript, which they need to check and listen to. but it helps to have it in place. But once you have all your transcripts and you're uploading it into the software and asking it to analyze the data, you've almost got to think about what was the point of you really doing the interviews at all. Depending on the sort of particular paradigm or theoretical framework from which, the data have been collected and ultimately analyzed, a lot of the work that we do as qualitative researchers involves reflexivity and positionality. And these are aspects of the way in which we, together with our theories and so on, look at our data and make sense of our data, which AI is really not capable of doing. So perhaps at a very descriptive level, it could give you just absolutely, just surface level meanings around the data, but the real interrogation, the real interpretation is still the work of the researcher. And especially if you are collecting data around people's lived experience, like in psychology, for example, lived experience of young children with depression and anxiety, or the impact that has on their families and caregivers. These are meaningful stories that require meaningful engagement. And so there is a place for AI, but perhaps not in meaning making and sense making in the data analysis phase, which many of you will probably be using ATLAS.ti for, I'm assuming. So it gives you preliminary insights on your data too. So there are features, for example, where you might want to import survey data into ATLAS.ti, not so much for the quantitative responses, but there may have been an open-ended question and you're interested in coding those responses, so it can assist you with that. So what are some of the pros and cons? So why do I need ATLAS.ti? Manual coding seems better. To me, it's really not an either or. It's about what you feel comfortable with. Qualitative studies these days tend to be quite large. People are collecting a lot of qualitative information, working in large teams across multiple sites, usually a number of people involved in the coding. So programs like these are really helpful because they, you can put all the interviews into an ATLAS.ti project, and that can be shared with team members, all of whom can be allocated some transcripts to code. And then you can merge those projects into one sort of file and work with the data quite easily in that way. So that's sort of for larger qualitative studies, or even within one study focused on lived experience in which or subjective experience, where you may have had to interview at least 20, 30 or 40 participants. And ATLAS.ti is really helpful because it's a lot of data, easy to manage, and ultimately you want to be able to retrieve your codes and the coded data quite easily and quickly. But in terms of manual coding, I mean, if for example, so I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with interpretive phenomenological analysis, but those studies typically have between 6 to 8 participants. So it's a much, much smaller sample size, but it also engages in different levels of analysis. And so you'll often find, people, will print out the transcripts with large margins on the sides of the pages to make their notes as they're reading through the transcripts, and then to think about transferring that to the software. So it's not really a decision. It's about what you feel comfortable with. Some people like to print out and read paper and, doing that familiarization phase more manually. But then for the sake of organization, data preparation, coding, and actually storing and sharing of the file. So sharing of the file with supervisors or other project collaborators, is a lot easier to do when it's handled, with software like ATLAS.ti. And also for those of you who are working on projects that have ethics approval, we need to keep it for a minimum period of time. And it's relatively easy to store an ATLAS.ti project, and you can also put a password on the project. So it becomes something that can be stored easily, kept. So in terms of resources and training, so how or where can I get ATLAS.ti? So the university does have ATLAS.ti available on its software hub. So if you haven't yet, it's worthwhile going to, I think it's on My Sun, and then navigating to the software hub where you can access ATLAS.ti and download it. Part of activating the campus license for ATLAS.ti requires you to create an account on the ATLAS.ti website. So that's ATLAS.ti.com. And you'll see there that it's got the tab for My ATLAS.ti. And so you would then click on that and create an account for yourself. And then part of creating that account will ask you for a code. And you can ask or look in the resources for the software hub for the code, the license for the code that is available, that you can paste in, and you can activate the campus license. So unlike SPSS or other software packages, ATLAS.ti hasn't always been around. It took actually a bit of persuasion to motivate for a campus license, but we were very happy when that finally happened, and means many more people are actually able to use this incredible software. So ATLAS.ti.com is a wonderful learning platform. Workshop and seminar attendees always worry that they will forget what they have seen or learned or practiced. Of course, this recording is available. I don't know how many times you are willing to listen to my voice, though. But if you're looking for something a little different, have a look at the ATLAS.ti video tutorials available on ATLAS.ti.com. And there's short, sort of bite-sized segments that offer very specific instructions around how you can create the various projects. The latest content, I should say, however, seems to have an AI-generated individual guiding you through the video. So perhaps if you're still interested in a human, maybe coming back to this one is helpful. I'm not anti-AI at all. I love what it can do for us, but I'm very much about skill first, and using tools to support what we do. So when you open up the platform, and I'll show you when I open up the application. So I don't know if you have all been able to download ATLAS.ti to your desktops. It's not necessary for this seminar or this webinar. Just time doesn't allow us to do sort of workshop practical engagement. But when you do, and when I open it up a little bit later, you'll see that available on the landing page is the link to all of the resources that ATLAS.ti has available. So the user manual, which is a very long document. There's also a shorter, quick tour version. Sample projects that you can play around with. I'll be using 2 in this demonstration today. It also offers you a link right there to the video tutorials, which you can then use to learn at your own pace. It has a link to the ATLAS.ti Academy, so for group training or individual sessions that you might want with some of the ATLAS.ti staff who work at ATLAS.ti, and then also the websites and all of the information that's available there. So the training and the resources that they have on the website is not only just tailored to videos about how to use ATLAS.ti, but there's also some really helpful and interesting resources around qualitative research more broadly, which might be very helpful for you to have a look at. It's got a social media platform. As I mentioned, it's got an excellent support team. And it's really, they've they've based it on sort of, the philosophy behind it is that it's captured in what's called the VICE principle. So visualization, immersion, serendipity, and exploration. So visualization, it's a tool that helps you to find patterns. Immersion, it's a tool that helps you to stay close to your data. Serendipity, so this refers to my earlier comment around, if you are working in a very structured and organized way with ATLAS.ti, and you're also coding in a consistent way, then it means that you can begin to ask some interesting questions of the data that may not necessarily be your research questions, but there may be sort of other ways in which you can explore the data, and perhaps you find something unexpected that you didn't anticipate, that perhaps it's the links between two interviews, or the contrast that comes up in parent or child narratives around the ways in which conflicts within the household are handled, as an example. And then exploration, so being able to discover what we didn't know yet. So almost any research endeavor, thesis, project, whatever it may be, is tailored around a research question, which is a question that has been asked because there is still something that we don't know, or something that remains poorly understood. And so it really helps to have all of these tools available so that we can try and make meaning of the data in the best way that we can in order to answer that question. So the core workflow that you would follow within ATLAS.ti is then to create your project, add your data, and you'll see when we actually go into the tool that there's a number of ways to do the same thing. So in terms of how you add documents or how you code the data, there's a number of different ways in which you can do it. So it's about finding the way that's most comfortable for you. Then it's to go about coding, analyzing, building theory. So and that's not necessarily, but isn't that only linked to something like grounded theory? Not necessarily there. It's how can you use the visualization features of ATLAS.ti, like the network view, for example, to perhaps look at the structure of your themes or the sub-themes that you've identified from the data, and building a thematic map around that. So it's have a look at that in kind of the broader sense of conceptual thematic maps, and then in the case of grounded theory, perhaps that might be your pursuit, and then the report, so how you write that up. So ATLAS.ti is really your project container. So ideally, and once again, if you think about storing of your project online for backup purposes and having everything in one place, it is actually a really great idea to bring all of the documents related to your project into ATLAS.ti. So bring in your research proposal, bring in your interview schedules, bring in your literature, bring in your audios, bring in your interviews, bring in your photographs if you've used creative methods, photographs or drawings or whatever it may be, that all of the sources of data, including your project proposal and the literature, and keep it all within ATLAS.ti, and you save it in one sort of ATLAS.ti project bundle that can be stored online, and everything is together in one place. So think of it as your entire project container. We'll talk about documents and quotations, and then because I'm less likely to come back to this particular slide, and I'll talk more about documents and quotations when we go into ATLAS.ti. You'll see at the bottom of the screen there is Johnny Saldana. There is a newer version of his book, however, but it's called The Coding Manual for Qualitative Researchers. And it's really helpful. And I believe the library does have a copy of this book. I think it does. And it's really helpful because often we tend to only think about coding at a very descriptive level. And the codes that we create, which is a short word or phrase related to a quotation in our transcript that we've highlighted and we deem important, we tend to really only create more of what is a label of that quotation. And so seldom we think about what are the other kinds of codes I can use that might help me to ask or identify some interesting patterns in the data. So he talks about cycle 1 and cycle 2 coding, and other qualitative researchers who also write about qualitative data analysis will always tell you that it's an iterative process. So if you've uploaded all of your sources of data, your interviews, focus groups, or whatever it may be into ATLAS.ti, and you've coded all of the data from start to end, and you've created codes, that's the beginning of the next phase. So when you've created codes across all of the transcripts, that's stage 1 of coding, because you then have to go back to your codes and you need to see, are there codes that sort of mean the same thing that I should merge into one code? Or is there a code where the number of quotations attached to the code is actually very large? So maybe it's a code called barriers. And so every time you've read in the transcript that there's a code, that there's something, talking about a barrier to something, and you've added that code to the quotation, you may have 100 quotations linked to this code called barrier. And then you need to ask yourself, perhaps that code was too broad. So how can I split it so that we can understand barriers to what, or what kind of barriers? And so how can you then structure and build your coding framework, or your code hierarchy or coding tree in a way that there's a good level of transparency. But then in addition to that, how can you use a variety of codes to support your analysis? So in vivo coding, which is actually a feature that you can just use straight away in ATLAS.ti, and I'll show you where that is where the quotation that you've highlighted in the transcript, so the piece of text, the participant's spoken word that you've highlighted in the transcript, actually becomes the code. And you can use that here and there. It's really helpful in something like discourse analysis or narrative analysis, but to not use it all the time, but to use it when there are particular quotations that you would like to capture the participant's voice as the code itself, rather than your summary of what that code is. So there's an example. If a participant talks about, I feel invisible, and you're actually using that as the code itself. You can think about process coding. So you can look at codes where you focus on what is happening. What is this action? Is there a process happening? You can look at emotion coding, where you capture specific emotional experiences. Perhaps you want to create a code around participants' anxiety or frustration. And this also will depend on how you transcribe your data. So one thing about AI transcription is it's going to transcribe what it hears. I've yet to see AI that can pick up on the emotions that the participants share during the interview. If you're aware of software like that, please let me know, but I'm not. So this is where it's actually very important that the AI doesn't do all of the transcription. Perhaps it builds the initial draft, but you need to go back to that draft. You need to listen to your recording, listen to your participant's voice, and think about what is some of the emotion behind the way in which that response has been given to you, and how might that be important to your analysis. So bring that into the transcripts as well. It also just elevates, the way in which you're going to ultimately engage with the data. So John Saldana's book is really useful, and it goes through different kinds of codes that you might want to think of, and that may or may not be useful to you. Cycle 2 coding is then, so that just means you've coded all of your data initially. So he talks about cycle 1 and cycle 2. But cycle 1 is that initial round of coding, and cycle 2 is now looking for the instances where you may merge codes, split codes, look for patterns, begin to link categories. This is where you are almost predominantly working with your code list and the codes that you've created, and you start to think about the structure and how you might group the codes, and whether there are some categories that are beginning to form, and how you can work with that. Available in ATLAS.ti are memos. So originally when ATLAS.ti was developed, the developers did base the workflow of the program then on principles of grounded theory. So with, with features in the program like open coding or in vivo coding or memoing, these are all sort of core aspects of grounded theory by Strauss and Corbin, and then later by Kathy Sharmas. And so these, have remained in the program because so Susanna Fraser, who had also taught as part of the African Doctoral Academy, who I don't know if she's still based there. I'm sure she is, who works for ATLAS.ti. She wrote the companion manual for the version of ATLAS.ti that was available then. I think it was ATLAS.ti 9. And so she talks about the NCT model in her book when working with ATLAS.ti, and that's a process of noticing, then collecting, and then thinking. And it's quite nice, and I think it's a really useful way to actually think about how you use the program and its various functions, and helps you to understand why it's been developed in the way that it does. But you've got quotations which you can highlight, which is your noticing of what may be important. You've got codes which then help you to collect. And then for the thinking part, you've got a memo function within ATLAS.ti, which really is just access to a blank notepad within the program. But it's your, as Susanna calls it, bench of reflection. So as you are working on the project, whether it's just still reading the data, noticing what might be important, thinking about why you think it's important, and so on, that you've got a space where you can write about it. And so a lot of, almost all qualitative proposals that I've read, especially in the sections around rigor and trustworthiness, will talk about, and I will keep a research diary, and in order to keep track of my reflexivity and positionality. I have yet to see any research diaries or even examples of them. I mean, it is sort of a, what you keep as a researcher as your bench of reflection and thoughts and so on. But it's an incredibly important part of working qualitatively. So having the memo function available, or just a space to write wherever you're working with qualitative information, you need a space in which you can unpack your thinking about the kinds of codes that you're creating. And of course, writing is thinking. And so as you're trying to write and articulate, your your thoughts around these codes that you've created. You're doing very important analytical work. So I'll show you what coding looks like. So these tools, the query tool, the code occurrence tool, the code document tool, these are aspects of the program that we tend to show in a more advanced rather than introductory course. But it's important to know that these tools exist and how you might be able to work with them. There's various reports that you can create from ATLAS.ti. And so, yeah, so instead of going through the slideshow on all of this, I'm actually right now going to switch straight into the program. But at this point, I just want to check, are there any questions? There was a comment, I think that's been dealt with. Any questions from anybody? All right.
Professor Coetzee, I can see that there was a question from Mrs. Yende. How can one differentiate inputs from different participants in a transcript when the interview was on MS Teams and two participants were sitting together?
Yeah, in that instance, you would have to listen to the recording and you would then have to edit the transcript to say that this was participant 1 and this was participant 2 and so on. So you'd have to listen to the recording again so you can see, when there's a change in voice that, okay, that's a different participant. That would be the best way to go about it. Right. So I have switched to the ATLAS.ti interface. Is this visible to everybody? Right, thanks very much. Okay, so when you open ATLAS.ti, and yeah, this is the Windows version. So of course, ATLAS.ti is supported on Mac. So if you have a Mac computer, you can still follow, but it might just look a little bit more different. There is also the ATLAS.ti cloud version, which I'm not demonstrating this afternoon, just for the sake of time. But there's a Windows, Mac, and then there's also the online cloud version that is available. So there's a question. Does ATLAS.ti require regular updates from time to time? Yes, it does. In fact, when I opened it yesterday, there was another update ready to go, but they're quite quick, in terms of downloading and installing. So it's usually quite minor, sort of regular updates. And then in terms of the changes between the versions, they're now in version 2026. I'm not sure when the next version will come out, but I think we'll still be using this well into next year. But sort of the ordinary updates do happen quite frequently, where it might go to version 26.2.1.3 or whatever it may be. That does happen quite often. Right. So when you open ATLAS.ti, if you're working with Windows, this is what you will see. So you'll have a list of all of the past projects, all the most recent projects that you've been working on. You can see here's an old project from a cloud version. This was a master's workshop on ATLAS.ti that I did in April, and these are some sample projects that are also used. So you can unpin these from your list, but generally you can quickly get access to your past projects. Then on the left here, you click on your name and so on the program. That's what you do when you're registering or you're creating an account for ATLAS.ti on ATLAS.ti.com under My ATLAS.ti. Then you're setting up your information there. So you can view your ATLAS.ti account and it links you straight to the online version. Then this would be for, I believe, for training purposes and so on. So it also takes you to your details about your campus license information. And so you don't really ever have to touch anything here, because the university will sort of update the license. And as I said, those recommended updates come often, so you don't have to worry too much about that. So I'll speak about these two now. These are kind of the main things. If we just click on options, trying to get it into the screen here. If you click on options, this is where you can look at just some of the application preferences that you might like. So you might want to decide if you want to use the light or the dark setting. So, where the background is white or where the background is dark, the kind of spacing that you want, the extent to which you want the text to be enlarged and so on. So you can play around here. I wouldn't fiddle with this, which is the ATLAS.ti's library location, is where it stores your projects and documents. So yes, on your computer, you've got a file that says master study, doctoral study, research project, whatever it may be. And you've got copies of and you've got your raw data there. So perhaps it's your audios as well as your transcripts. When you import these documents into ATLAS.ti, ATLAS is copying that information over into the program. You're the only one who has access to it, but it's not just linking to the file where you've saved it on your computer. It makes copies as it brings it into the program so you can work with it. So any changes that you make to your documents here, perhaps in the way that you've named it, or whatever it may be, it's not going to change the documents where you've stored them on your computer. If you're importing really large kinds of data, like video data, for example, which is, if you are bringing it into ATLAS.ti and you're trying to save that as a whole project bundle, that's going to be quite a large file. And so it's actually recommended that for such large files, that perhaps it's better to link rather than import that file. And I'll explain what that means.
Colleagues, can we just make sure that your microphones are switched off? Thank you.
Thanks very much. All right, so then in terms of project preferences, you can decide when opening projects, automatically launch any of these navigation tools. I've got most of mine on never, because when I open up an application, I don't want a whole bunch of things popping up. So these are the automatic and default settings. So just so that you are aware what these features are. And here again, it's just the ATLAS.ti license information. All right. So then, as you might recall from the slides, I spoke about the resources that are available to you. So here they are. It's live links to the user manual, live links to sample projects, and so on. So this is all at your fingertips, video tutorials, all the kinds of support that you may need. You might be uncertain. So how do I group documents again? And then you can quickly go to one of the short video tutorials about that rather than, navigating through a long webinar like this one. So then these are perhaps the two most important features on the screen, apart from this. And it's when you import your project or create a new project. So let's create a new project. So click on new project. It might be your project name. I remember doing a training at UWC with postgrads, masters, and doctoral students, and it's still one of the best suggestions for a project name that I ever got, which was someone who called it My Life's Work. That was hilarious. It's always stuck with me. So anyway, obviously you're going to name your project perhaps something a little bit more appropriate, master study or whatever it may be. So you name it and you can comment on it as well. So this comment feature is really useful if you are working with a number of team members and this project file is going to be shared amongst those team members. It may be helpful to have a brief description here of what the study is about. And so you can comment on your project. And you can click on create. And it's just going to think a little bit. And then ATLAS.ti will open up. So the interface has changed a lot over the years. It's certainly a lot easier to navigate, but the features are still incredibly redundant. And that links to what I mentioned earlier, that there is a number of ways to do the same thing. Okay, so let's talk through the features. So here's the description of your project. Here's a brief comment related to it. Of course, you can edit that comment at any time just by clicking on edit comments. Everything is, the margins are adjustable, so you can work with this in a way that feels most comfortable to you. So you can adjust your margins. And then you'll see that it's got this navigation panel on the left. So it's called Explore. And this is really a copy of the functions at the top here, but it's just much easier to visualize. So here you can see, for example, how many codes you've created or how many documents you've uploaded, whereas these are known as, the various managers, the document manager, the quotations manager, the codes manager, memo, network, links, and so on. So here you can get a really good overview of a number of entities that you have within the project. And then there's also another summary of it over here. So there's a lot of features, but some of them really all just saying the same thing. So we've already had a look on the landing page at some of those project features here. So this latest interface design, I'm trying to think now, when did it start to look like this? I think it was before version 22. But really, the way in which it's set up now, so the way in which the interface looks, is really trying to mimic other applications that we use regularly, for example, as Windows users. So this looks a lot like what Microsoft Word would look like with the various tabs and so on when you open it up. And so they try to develop it on the applications that we use frequently. And so the same thing is for the Mac version, where it's also set up in the way that Mac users may interact on those devices. So if you click on File, this is quite nice because this is where you can set the password for your project. So if you're working in a team, or if you're a master's or doctoral student and you're sharing your project with your supervisors, either to perhaps listen to your recording, so if you've uploaded the audios into ATLAS.ti, or you want them to have a look at your first round of coding on one of your transcripts, then that's quite nice. You can set the password and then you can send this file via email. So it's password protected. Or you can set a password and upload it onto OneDrive and then send the OneDrive link to the supervisor. So it is quite nice that we can protect these projects now. It hasn't always been a feature. If you click on New, it allows you to do exactly what we did before, to either import a project or create a new project. You click on Open, it gives you links to all of the previous projects that you've had open. It's also got a feature called Snapshot here, which is, it creates a snapshot of the current project. So it's almost like a save. Although I would recommend that you always do a proper actual save of your project, then take a snapshot. So this is perhaps you're very interested in the timestamps around when changes were made in the project, then it might be nice to say, I was here at this point in time, I was here at this point in time. Whereas with a general save, there isn't, that's saving everything at that point in time. Whereas the snapshot, if you're quite interested in having these timestamps of how the coding has progressed, which is I found seldom really useful, actually. So in the export tab, you've got to export the project bundle or to export your project in an XML standard form. So then, in other applications where this might be useful to upload, but generally you're going to work with export project bundle. So this is the export that you do. So if you're working on your computer, you've got the place on your computer, the file, the folder where you've saved ATLAS.ti. So every time you click save, it's saving it there. As soon as you want to move its location, so if you want to move where you've saved the file, or you want to back it up online, or whatever it may be, you come here to export project bundle, and then it says the project bundle compiles all of the project data and media. So compresses it all into a bundle, which then you will then click on export, and that's then the ATLAS.ti file that contains everything that you can then move to a different storage location, either on your device or sending it to someone or uploading it to the cloud or wherever it may be. So that's not just save and then send, save, export project bundle, and then change the location or share it. Merging is really helpful to merge different project bundles. This is especially helpful when you're working in teams. So perhaps you've done a study on the lived experience of first-year university students at Stellenbosch University, and you've done, let's say, about 40 interviews across the various faculties or departments, and now you're going to have individuals who are part of the project to represent those different faculties or departments code their transcripts. And so you'll have a project manager, so someone who would then set up the ATLAS.ti project file, and then the transcripts for each member of the team uploaded into that file. So the file's got the same name, everybody's got different documents, and then you may have collaborated on the kind of codes that you will be using to code the transcript. So there's many different ways, as you may know, and many of you are familiar with different research methods, where you may be working inductively or deductively, so where you are creating codes from the data itself, or using a template or a framework or a code book with a suggested list of codes that you want to apply to all of the transcripts. So then typically if you're working in a team and people are coding the data, we tend to work inductively in the first instance. So that's the code book development. So everybody codes 1 or 2 interviews. You then have a meeting. So 1 or 2 of the same interviews. The team has a meeting. You compare and contrast the kinds of codes that were created across each of the transcripts that you all coded, and you try to come to some consensus. So in ATLAS.ti, there is a feature that you can use to determine iterator reliability or a kappa coefficient for the kinds of whether there was consistency in the coding between the different coders. And so that option is available. But generally with the code book development in the first instance, it might be a consensus meeting as you then develop the list of codes that you might want to apply to the remainder of the transcripts. And then it's useful maybe then to use the intercoder feature where there is an expected list of codes to use, and then what do people, how are the transcripts then actually coded in the end? So it might be useful to do that. But the project merge, or this merge project, is then helpful to when everybody has sent their coded transcripts back to the project manager. You can then use this function to merge all of that back into one ATLAS.ti file, to have all the data together again, but also coded. So Project Bundle is very useful for that. And then I just pressed close by accident. So let's go back in. All right. So that was then the Files tab. You've got options. It's the same as what we have already gone through. Okay. In your Home tab, this is probably where you will spend the most of your time. This is where you upload your documents. These are where you can create new entities, perhaps new codes or a new memo or a new network. This is the project comments, a seriously redundant feature because you can literally edit it there. But if you want to, you can also edit it there. This is the navigator. So the Explore, this is this Explore view. It's currently open here. And these then are the project management tools, as I have mentioned. And these are the ones that I'm going to focus on for the remainder of the half an hour that we have. I quickly want to show you search and code. Once you've coded data, these functions will become available to you. And so for those of you who are interested with experimenting with AI and AI coding, perhaps using AI coding, I don't know, for a literature review or something like that, there's on YouTube, on the ATLAS.ti's YouTube channel, you can watch some interesting videos around how to use AI for coding for a literature review, which is a whole entire seminar on its own. And you can also use, these are also actually kinds of AI coding here, because sentiment analysis is when you're asking AI, is when you're asking ATLAS.ti to read through all of your transcripts and then to code it for whether there's sort of, it's more of a positive sentiment or a negative sentiment. So it can do that kind of coding. Concepts is like the search, the Control F function in Word, where you can enter a word or a phrase or a concept, and you can ask it to look for that across the data. And opinion mining. So you can also ask it to look through the transcripts as to whether there were any particular opinions about things shared, and it can highlight that for you. These analyze functions, as I showed in the slides, tools that we use once the data have been coded and have been coded in a nice and consistent way with a good structure built around the coding. You can then start to query the data. So you can only query what you've coded for. Import and export, this is really cool. They need to update this logo though to Elon's X, but you can import Twitter data. I really don't know who uses Evernote anymore. Ref Manager, surveys, social media, and perhaps the most useful one to talk about here is just the code book. So depending on which discipline you're in, or even which kinds of analytic approach you're using, you may have examiners or you may have reviewers who want to see your code book. And so the code book really is just the list of codes that you've created, a definition of that code, and an example quotation to illustrate what that might look like in a transcript. And so for ATLAS.ti, with every quotation that you're coding, it's capturing the code, the quotation, and it's got a comment feature. So you can comment on it, And so you can do that as you code, and ultimately when you're done with coding, you can click on this and it gives you a code outputs that you can use. Got a number of tools, find redundant codings. That's really helpful if you want to use the merge function. And then the help feature. So here you can click and it immediately takes you to the YouTube channel where you can navigate for more support. All right. So I'm back in the Home tab. And so what is this going to look like? So you've collected your data. You're interested in uploading all of your documents. So you can go to add documents, and then it's going to allow you to search for where you've saved them. So I've got to look for this training. And then I might look at, so here's the sample project 1. Go back sample project 2. This only, oh, these are the project bundles. Okay. So let's have a look at the well, at this stage, we can actually just upload anything because I will unpack the project bundle in a minute. So let's look at if I were interested in bringing in some transcripts. The data would be here. I've got a PDF, I've got Word documents, and then I've also got these look like they are either songs or images actually. So you can select the whole bunch just with Shift and open. So it's adding the documents now into that ATLAS.ti library. So it's copying, so it's not going to change anything. And so there you can see you've uploaded 7 documents into ATLAS.ti. So you can see it there as well as there. And suddenly you've got a drop-down arrow available to you. So if you click that, you can see document 1 is your PDF. Then you've got your parenting blog. So this is a sample project on children and happiness, where parents were interviewed around the extent to which children bring happiness or not, and the meaning that they make of the meaning that they've been making of their lives up until that point. So there's a blog to read about, a New York Times piece, some research. There's obvious typo there. And then we double click on this. Yeah, these are images. So you can perhaps think if you're doing a photo voice study, and you've got participants who are bringing their photos into for analysis, you can upload this into ATLAS.ti. And here is where they may have selected images to represent how they feel. So if you double click on the projects or on the documents, they will open up in the various tabs. So this is the PDF. Think having children will make you happy. The second one is the parenting blog. Does having children make you unhappy? By Lisa Balkin. And then there's readers' comments on that blog. So this is just to demonstrate that your documents are going to open up in the various tabs that you have available. So all that you have at this point then are the documents that you've brought through. You said add documents, add files. You've navigated to where you want to find them on your computer. You've either selected one or all of them, depending on what you want to bring in at that point, and you click on open. You can also add an entire folder. So you may want to bring in an entire folder. And this then is the add a linked video or audio. And you can see it's specific to those 2 kinds of data because they're large files usually. And so you might not want ATLAS.ti to copy it into the project because it may then be quite large to share over email or to store or to back up. So then you would link it. it does then mean that it's linking to where those files are saved on the computer which they were saved. So if you're storing it and somebody else has access to it and downloads the project bundle onto their computers, they're probably not going to be able to get access to the raw video and audio if you've linked it in this way. However, if you've added the audio and video as you do for any other file that you're uploading, then of course they will have access to the raw data because it's all been copied into the project. You can then also import a transcript. So of course, you can bring in a transcript as a Word document via the normal add documents, add files, but some people use very specific transcription software that includes timestamps that have been linked to the audio, and this is then for those time-stamped transcripts that you can bring in. If you click on New Text Document, it's literally just a document where you might want to use ATLAS.ti for transcription. Interestingly, ATLAS.ti does have an AI transcription feature. We just don't, our license that we currently have doesn't cover it. It's an additional cost. So they do, but it's not covered by the university. So you may have to find other tools to assist you with that. And then lastly, in terms of add documents, you can also add a geo document, which literally I've just clicked on it. So it links to map data, and perhaps you want to link, if you've done the work in a perhaps a very remote or urban area, and you want to kind of link a visual to that, then you can add or link to maps in ATLAS.ti as well. All right, so I'm just going to close all of these. So your documents open up in the various tabs. So again, all you have at this point are your documents. So now you need to think about, well, what I've done, all that I've done here is I clicked on the documents manager. All of these little boxes represent the managers. This is where you will be able to organize the documents that you've uploaded into ATLAS.ti. Once you create quotations, this is where they will be stored. The codes are here, your code manager, memos, networks, and so on. So if you click on the documents manager, you'll see it opens as a tab. This is where you can come and organize your documents in a way that's going to be useful and that might support your analysis. So I see the comments about coding hierarchy. Yes, I'll definitely get to that. Thank you for the comment. So in your document manager, so yeah, you need to think about how you might want to organize your documents. Perhaps you've got your literature review in here, but if you're keeping all of that separate and you're only working with the data sources, the data that you've collected, you may have, again, you may have multiple kinds of data. So you may have interview data, focus group data, images from body mapping, or other kinds of images from other arts-based methods, or whatever it is that you've used. And so I'm just going to do this at random, but basically you might want to think about organizing those documents into particular groups. So maybe you want to create a folder for your interviews, a folder for the focus groups, a folder for the creative. You've got to decide what kind of groupings of the data do you want to make, and think about why that might be useful. So let's do that first, and then I'll talk about some of the other ideas. So let's imagine these were my interview data. So just to say, all I've done was select it using Shift, and then I drag and drop it into this. These are document groups. So these are your documents, and here's where you create the document groups. And so here, I might just name this. These are all my interviews. And No, there is a bug at the moment. So you have to be able to create as many groupings as you want. And this happened in the other training. And it means that you may need to actually go into the document group manager as well, and then think about creating them here. So with a bug, I mean, so I've dragged and dropped this into there to have interviews, and so I want to do the same here to create a new grouping, a different grouping. But there's a block. It's not letting me do that. So that's definitely a bug. But you can get around it with working in documents that are not yet in groups. And so here you might want to create a new group. I would call this focus groups. And then for focus groups, I would say I want these documents in there. And then for the last one, we'll probably create a new group and maybe just call this the body maps. And then for the last two, I would put them in there. So often participants will ask me, well, can one document be in more than one group? Of course, yes, it can be, because you can create an infinite number of groups, whatever might support your analysis. So the other kinds of groups you might be thinking of, well, perhaps you had you had spoken to perhaps male, female, and trans individuals. So perhaps you want 3 groupings of the interview. So those related to male perspectives, female, trans, whatever. And then you can organize your transcripts according to that. And the reason why these groupings are helpful and important is because, again, it's about how you then query the data. So imagine you've coded all of your transcripts. And now you've got a code related to let's say, limited access to specialist services. And you've used this code across all of your transcripts, but you're only interested in what adolescent girls had to say about this. Then you can create a filter on these groupings so that you can, when you create an output, you only get the quotations from those participants and not everybody. So that means if I want to only have make an output here, I would right click on the group that I'm interested in and I would set a global filter. So it says there's now a filter on interviews. And so, of course, once you create codes, then you can specify which code it is that you want to make an output of. So when you want to get rid of the filter, you just click on the X. So I've organized my documents and I've organized it for the purposes of what I might want to query the data for. Do you have to do this right at the beginning? No, not necessarily. You may only think about groupings a little bit later on, but you can begin to organize and structure and prepare your documents in this way. All right. So now I might start with coding. I'm ready to begin coding. So depending on what kind of data analysis approach that you use, I think one of the most common ones that is used in qualitative research is thematic analysis. So thematic analysis is an umbrella term. It's inclusive of reflexive thematic analysis, code book thematic analysis, and code reliability analysis. So Braun and Clark write specifically about reflexive thematic analysis. So I would say that's probably the most common approach. And so with reflexive thematic analysis, and actually most qualitative data analysis approaches, it usually starts with a familiarization phase. Regardless of which approach you're using, you need to know your data. And then ultimately a coding phase. So then once you are familiar with the data, and it's not just reading and rereading, it's active engagement with the data. It's note-taking, it's thinking, it's starting to build your code list. So it's active engagement, and then you would go about coding the data. So with ATLAS.ti, as you are reading through documents, whatever they may be, you as the researcher, dependent on your topic, dependent on the research question and the objectives that you are aiming to address, you need to decide and identify what is relevant and what is important and what would be helpful in answering the research question. It is very possible that you are going to create many more codes than what you would actually report on in your final project. But nonetheless, it's important for you to notice what you think is important and to collect it. So remember Susanna's noticing, collecting, thinking. When you notice it, highlight it, collect it, and then have a space to think about it. So just at random, I might find this important. So I'm clicking and I'm just literally dragging and dropping over the text, and I'm thinking, this is really important. So you can see I've highlighted the piece of text or the quotation or whatever it may be. This is clearly an article and not a participant's transcript, but nonetheless, just to demonstrate coding. Now that I've highlighted all of this, you can see that the coding features or these objects become available to me. So in ATLAS.ti, what's really nice about the program, which you don't really see in the other programs, is that it recognizes a quotation and a code as two separate objects. And that's nice because it means that you can highlight a quotation and not necessarily have to code it straight away. And it's useful because perhaps you're reading through a piece of text, you know it's important, but you don't yet know what you want to name it. But you can still capture it so you don't have to read the whole thing again to try and find out what was that quotation that was important. So here you can click on quotation. When you click on quotation, it creates the blue bar. If I highlight this piece of text and I'm reading here, and I'm not going to try and come up with any kind of exciting code at this point, but if here, for example, I'm reading this and I know already what I want to code it, then I can click on coding. So you can access your coding here, quotation, you can click it here at the top feature, but also if you're more like me and you like to right click, you can right click on the highlighted text and these features become available to you. So there's the free quotation, apply code, code in vivo, which I spoke about. So if I click on that, the entire code is going to be all of the text highlighted there. So you need to think about when is it useful to use code in vivo. Quick coding, that will become active once you've actually created a code, because then it's got a previous code option for you to use. So I'm going to apply codes. And so here, I'm not going to try and think of a creative code name here. So I'm simply going to call this code A. You'll remember that as part of the outputs that you can create from ATLAS.ti, one of them is your code book. And I mentioned the code book is the code, quotation, and the description of the comments on the code. And that's what you do here. So you can say, going to let me, okay, first I need to create the code, and then here I can say, this code is about da-da-da-da-da. And so if you're in the habit of commenting on all of your codes, then you can create that code book, or Atlas can create that code book for you. The code, the quotation, and the description. So you've got your whole code book ready to go. All right. So just at random, so you will work through all of your transcripts. So here's the next one. You'll highlight a piece of text. If you want to, quick coding has just become available, so perhaps that's code A. As the next piece of text that you found important, you can either just mark the quotation, perhaps you don't know what you want to call it yet, code immediately, in which you capture the quotation and the code, and code in vivo, which doesn't really make sense in this case because the code is so long. And so you'll go through all of your transcripts and you'll do your coding. here you can see from your Explore view that you've got these two codes available. So, and we're almost at the end of time, but there's just a couple more things I want to show. So for those of you who can hang on, please do. For those of you who can't, do watch the recording afterwards. Kirchner, if it's okay, I think I might need another 15 more minutes or so. And it's really then dependent on who can stay. But I don't know if you and Peter need to leave. Will it continue recording?
Professor Coetzee, I'm here, so I don't
Is it
have to
fine?
be anywhere, so it should be fine. I also see that there are, I think, 3 additional questions that's been asked. So, yes, take your time.
Okay, thanks. So let me have a look. Oh, hi, Miriam. Will you still need an independent coder if you've used ATLAS.ti? Not necessarily. I mean, it depends on the project. So if it's perhaps a collaborative project, then it would be you and your collaborators. Independent coders, I suppose you're wondering about that in the context of someone checking the accuracy of the coding or whatever that may be. And that's not necessarily, you don't need that for all kinds of projects. So if you are coding the project under the guidance of a supervisor or with your collaborators, then that should be fine. I will talk about the code hierarchy. I'm going to unpack a project. So parent code, a subcode, subcode. So there won't be a subcode, but you can have a parent code and a subcode, and I'll show you how to do that. And then the difference between a quotation and a code. Okay, I shall do so. To access the recording, I believe it will be on the library's YouTube page. And then Teams, got to leave. Yes, there you go. Krishna said YouTube page. All right, so I guess perhaps before we look at building the coding hierarchy, it is important to differentiate between what a code is and what a quotation is. So the quotation is the actual text that you're highlighting. So in this instance, it's the text from the parenting blog. This could just as well have been the interview transcript of the conversation between yourself and the participants, or the research assistant and the participants. And so each word, each line, each sentence of the transcript is then is a potential quotation. So it is the data that you're highlighting and you want to capture. So this that I've highlighted here would then be my quotation. It's the raw data. It's the actual text. The code is and you remember from the slides that I've shown, you can have different kinds of codes, and people often use descriptive codes, which is then a short word or a phrase, that you use to basically in shorthand describe that quotation. So here, for example, it says, so the children do not bring happiness. In fact, more often they seem to bring unhappiness. That's the conclusion of one academic study after the next. And there are so many that makes one wonder if researchers kept trying, hoping for a different result. That's actually quite funny. But here you might, if you were to create a quotation or a code around that, it might be unhappiness related to having children. So it's just a shorter kind of word or phrase. The way that you create your codes is going to be guided by your objectives. If you're working with a particular theory, the kinds of analysis that you're doing. So the code is creating a code you're doing so with the idea that this becomes something that I will hopefully likely use in other transcripts as well. So you don't have just a set of unique codes for one transcript. You're trying to develop codes which can also be applied to others. So that means if I'm now in document 5, so let's pretend I'm reading through this. I find this quite interesting, and it's also perhaps about unhappiness with children. So I can drag and drop this code there. I can use the same code because this is what you want to do. It's qualitative data analysis is also data reduction. So you want to be able to look for the patterns, so the similarities as well as the differences in perspectives and opinions of your participants across the narrative. Or if you're using ATLAS.ti for literature reviews, you're still you might create a code around a particular theory and want to use that code to capture all of the instances in which that theory is spoken about across the literature. So the code is the shorthand kind of summary, usually descriptive, but there's other ways in which you can code as well. And the quotation is the actual highlighted text. So when you come to, so we've spent some time in the document manager where we've seen how we organize the codes. In the quotations manager, this is where all of your quotations are that are linked to the codes that you've developed. So here this is quite nice because if you've only been clicking quotation, and you haven't been creating a code as I demonstrated, this is where you can actually come and sit with your list of quotations, and you can see this quotation here isn't linked to any particular code. So imagine if you're thinking about your phases of analysis, the first phase being familiarization, perhaps you've just used the quotation feature to mark all of the quotations across the transcripts that you think are important. Then you can come to the quotation manager and you can read through the quotations again. At the bottom here, they are written out in full. So as you click through them, they're written out in full. And it's here where you can decide what you might want to call this quotation, how you might want to code it. So that for this very first one here, and again, I'm not going to try and come up with a beautiful descriptive example of this quotation, but perhaps this isn't what code A is about. It's something else. So I can create a new code and I can call this code B. And then I can drag and drop this quotation into code B. And so if you have a whole long list of quotations here, so that's quite nice about this this overview, is you can very quickly see which quotations have been assigned to a code and which haven't yet. And you can actually come and spend time in the quotation manager and create your codes and drag and drop the quotations that belong to that code using this space here, which is very useful. If you've created a name for a code and you want to change it, you can see that rename is available at the top. You can click on that, or you can just, if in doubt, right click, and you can then just navigate to renaming the code, which is right down at the bottom. All right. So in terms of coding and hierarchy, so what I want to do just quite quickly is go to File, Open, and I want to go to New, and import a project. So this means, so again, you remember me talking about this export feature. So we typically export the project bundle. That's the save, the big save of everything in the file that you can move around, share on email, put on the cloud, whatever it may be. So if somebody has sent you their project bundle and you now want to open it up in ATLAS.ti, you would then say open, new, import project, click on import, and go and navigate to the project that you want to import. So I'm going to try to look for the stage 3, and this is a sample project called Project Sustainability. You can see that it's an ATLAS.ti project file, and I can open this up. And then it says the project name. Are you happy with that, or do you want to rename it? I'm fine with it, so let's import it. So there's 37 documents that are being imported. So here's a new ATLAS.ti project. Here's a short description. Welcome to the ATLAS.ti sample project. Feel free to explore any part of this project. To get started, we recommend reading the memo, sample project description. We wish you all the best in your research and count on your support for any questions you might have. So it's quite nice. They put a lot of effort into developing these tools for training purposes. So if you navigate to the Explorer function here, 37 documents have been imported. There is a bit of literature. There are 10 expert interviews. There are layperson interviews. There is also BBC News correspondence, and then also you can see a linked video here. I don't know if the sound is going to play. Okay, so that's just to show you that you can add a video or a file to ATLAS.ti. So this is obviously being copied into ATLAS.ti for the project bundle purposes. And that you can also do some manual transcribing here if you don't have that AI feature that ATLAS.ti has just brought up. So there's a number of documents in here. What's also in here is codes that have been developed. So if we look at these documents, we can see that the codes that have been created are mostly related to the 3 pieces of literature. So the interviews and so on. So that would be then, so they've split these sample projects up into stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. So this is the stage 3 one. So the PDFs and whatever have been coded. So in the other stages, the interview data, and we won't have time to look at that today. What we really just want to get to is a complete code list. Spoken about the document manager. Now we can see these documents were grouped: interviews by experts, literature review, interview transcripts, interviews by lay people, and some YouTube clips. Remember, you can also group interviews by location: urban, peri-urban, rural, South Africa, Kenya, Zimbabwe, male, female, trans, infancy, childhood, adolescence, depending on who you've spoken to. So think about what might be helpful for the purposes of creating a filter on that project, so you can, when you make an output, only see those quotations and not all of the codes and quotations that you've created in the project. So, and I'll demonstrate what that looks like now. So then in terms of the codes, so what has opened up here now, I just want to close. So all the objects open up in tabs. I've clicked on the code manager and it opens up in a tab. So here you can see the whole list of codes that have been created. In total, this project has 83 codes. You can see that at the bottom left-hand corner. You can also see that There's what's referred to as groundedness and density. Groundedness is frequency. So groundedness is the number of times that that code has been used across the documents. And density is the number of times that that code has been linked to another code. So if I were to visualize this code, for example, so if I were to click on it, I can see this code around attitudes. And remember, if you are interested in building your code book, I click on attitudes, and at the right here, you've got your diagram. So this shows a code sort of distribution by source, showing which document this code was used in most often. You can have a preview of the 13 quotations that are linked to this code. And you can also look at the comment that's been created about this code. And here it says, an individual's way of thinking or feeling towards the environment and their relationship with the environment. So this is what how the researchers conceptualized attitudes in this study. So, and then for behaviors, the same thing. So you can see all of these green arrows have a little yellow dot attached to it. Means that that code has got a comment linked to it. So if I want to, so I know that there are 13 quotations linked to this code, but I also know that this code has been linked to 4 other codes. And if I want to visualize that, then I can right-click on the code and I can say, show in network. There I can see there's attitudes. Attitudes has been linked to 4 other codes. And you can then also see the documents that's been linked to it. And for each of these, you can also right-click, add neighbors, add the quotations. So you can actually see what the quotations were that are linked to those codes. So you can use the network function throughout your project. It doesn't just have to be in the beginning, it doesn't just have to be at the end. At any point in which you want to visualize your coding, you can do so. So how do you create these connections between the codes? Well, you can do it right here in the code list. And first of all, I should say that the way in which these code groups have been created is the same way in which the code groups and documents have been created. So codes have been selected and have been dragged and dropped and been given a group name. Okay, and so as I mentioned, your codes can form, your documents can be in many different groups, your codes can be in many different groups. Sorry about that. And so here I've selected group 1, so it's highlighted it. So I just want to get all my codes back. Here we go. So once I've sorted my codes into various groupings, I might then want to do this hierarchy and create some hierarchy, as Ms. Bronwyne, I hope I pronounced that correctly, asked about. And so here, what you need to do if you want to create that kind of hierarchy is you actually need to create an empty code first. So let's say, for example, let's see if we can organize these by color. Right. So I've just clicked here on the left. So how do you create color? You just select the code, you would right click, and you can just say change color. So right now it's orange, maybe you want then purple. So if these, if you're looking at your code list, so remember again, if you're thinking about the steps of analysis, familiarization, coding, refine your code list. That's what you're doing here at stage 3. It's, of typical thematic analysis. You're refining the code list. So if these 4 codes belong together and you want to start creating some structure and hierarchy to the list, I need to create an empty code first. So I'm going to say new code, and I'm going to call this I'm not going to I'm not feeling very creative at the moment. I'm going to go with generic names. Code category, and I'm going to create it. So now I would select those 4 codes and then drag and drop them scrolling infinitely and drag and drop them in there. Have they dragged? I've merged them in there. And so when I just see, it's a little bit challenging when the new code is all the way at the bottom. Let's see. So I was trying to organize it by code. So basically, you would then drag and drop the codes into an empty code. So it has to be an empty code. So you'll drag it in there, and you can move the code into that category. So this is now not my purple ones that I created. So if I just, thank goodness there is a undo button. So at the top left of the screen, that undo button is a new feature of ATLAS.ti since about version 9, I think, which doesn't sound new because we're currently in version 26, but it jumped from version 9 to version 22. So yeah. So you have to create an empty category, and then you've got to select the codes that you want to form part of that category. And then you move, not merge, you move the 4 codes under that category. And then you can see you've got, and that's the kind of hierarchy that you can build with ATLAS.ti. So Ms. Longwana, that's how you would go about structuring the code list until you've got a number of these sort of code hierarchies. And you may want it for some codes, but not all. But then some of these might belong together in what you might deem as a theme or a broader category that you've identified from the data, and you can bring that then also as a code group. So it's important to say that not every code group that you develop here is necessarily a theme. You may have a group of codings just for the sake of organizing the data. But then if you're now at the point where you're actually wanting to identify your themes, then maybe call that theme 1 and then the name of the theme. So you know which of these code groupings you're actually saying are the themes related to your data. So that's then a bit about documents, quotations, and codes, and just to get you started, that you can think about grouping your codes, you can organize your codes, and then to think about memos. So here you'll see in this project, there's a number of memos. They created one for the learning objectives. They created one about the literature review, about the methodology. So there's a memo for everything. A memo is your space to write. So you can create a new memo, and maybe this one is called your research diary. I do encourage my students when they're in the analysis phase to keep a research diary and to literally have the date in there. So to say, it's 13th of May, and what I did in ATLAS today. Just writing what I did in ATLAS today. The kinds of codes developed, thinking about the codes and the quotations, what's coming up. Is there any literature or theory you might want to link with that? Where are your thoughts at? And I encourage them to come do this in a memo space. So it's not necessarily that I need to see it or read it, but it's important because this writing and this reflecting is your thinking. It's organizing your thoughts around the sense making or the meaning making that you're engaging in. And then for networks, remember, networks is your visualization space. So I've shown how you can, right click on a code. So all I've done is here's the code called Research Gap. I right click on it and I say, show in a network, and I can see, make this a little bit bigger. That was the one on methodology, empirical, and this is the theoretical gap. So these are all the kinds of gaps that you might find. You can play around with the way in which it's shown. You can change the layouts, whichever looks very nice and pretty to you. And then whenever you want to add things that are linked to it, you say add neighbors. So if you've got documents linked to this, or a memo linked to this, or a code, or whatever it may be, you add the neighbors for this particular entity. You can also add in a node here. And this means that perhaps I want to add a memo. So maybe my research diary, I would like to add here so that I can edit it. Let's see if I close this here, my research diary. Open. And so that I can just, maybe it's a memo that's linked to this particular network. And this network might be where you are thinking through a particular theme that you've identified. So you've got the code, the various code groups around it, and then maybe all of the quotations. And so bringing in the quotations might make it all look very messy. So you might just want to work at the level of the code and the code's linked to it, but start to write what is the relationship between these codes. If you think about the stages of analysis, you're familiarizing, coding, refining the codes, identifying your initial themes, reading the quotations linked to the codes that are part of each theme. And that sense making is what you can then do in your memo space. So this one here, if I open up this conceptual framework, this is nice with the code category here around behaviors. And then they've got these links that they created, and that's quite easy to do. You just literally drag and drop from one entity to the next, and then you can say is a part of, or you can drag, click on the small box to the next, and can be, however you want the relationship. And then if there's a relationship here that doesn't reflect what you wanted to say, you could just click on new relationship and create your own one. So the last thing that I want to demonstrate, if people are still around, so some of you are still around, thank you so much. I will wrap up soon. Is what I spoke about in the beginning, about the kinds of outputs that you can create. So if I am interested in what my lay people participants had to say about one of the codes that I created, I'm going to start here. So I'll say, right click, set global filter. So it's only going to work with these interviews. I'm going into the code manager, and I'm going to say, and you would need to know your data, but you might want to have a look at, and you can decide on any which code you might be interested in. Let's see one where there's quite a lot of quotations attached to it. see what their attitudes were towards the environment and the relationship with the environment. And I'm going to right click here, and I'm also going to set the global filter. So lay people's attitudes towards the environment. And then here, I'm going to say, then we can say right click. I just wanted to check. It's in the, it's much easier actually because it doesn't have the export report. That's probably the only one that they don't have in the right click option. But you can then go to export and you can say report. So there's one selected item, so it was the attitudes. And perhaps not as interested in the comments as I am the quotations. And so then I click on create report. And there isn't any data related to this. So there's filter documents for lay people and codes about attitude. So there aren't any codes related to that here. So this wasn't a good query to ask. But the idea is that you can see, you can create filters so that you only have the quotations of those that you're interested in. So let's go back to the document manager. Let's close that. Let's perhaps say experts with the interviews with the experts, and go back to our code manager. And I wonder if there would be any outputs on that. Create the report. And so this is probably attitudes wasn't sort of perhaps coded for here. Let's see where they were coded. Oh, that makes sense. Because in this particular project, only the PDFs were coded. So not the actual interviews. So that wasn't a good grouping to make. So we would have to rather do this. It's the literature review, set global filter, codes, attitudes, and then set global filter, create the report. And then there you go. Only on the attitudes. So yeah, and you can read through each of these together as you would need to do in order to make sense of, so what is this code saying, or what is this group saying? All right. Yeah, I think I'm going to have a look at whether there's any more questions, but I've sort of reached the end of this very brief and introductory hour-and-a-half overview. And let's see. What purpose does it serve in the overall analysis? Is it possible to highlight all the responses from our participants' quotations? By highlight, do you mean like an actual highlighter, like a yellow color? Or do you want to unmute yourself, Miss Bronwyne? Please unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right. Thank you so much for the informative session. When you were presenting on the codes and the quotations, you did say with the quotations, we just highlight. We don't necessarily need to apply a code on the quotation, if I remember correctly.
Mm.
And then you did mention that it's actually the actual text. So that is how my question came about in saying, because in an interview, you have responses from the participants. Do we then highlight those responses as the actual text of what was said? We highlight them as quotations, or we can just create codes and not necessarily have quotations.
No, the codes will always be linked to a quotation.
Oh, okay.
Well, you can. I mean, you can bring a list of codes in, but your job at the end will then be, if you've got a list of empty codes, that you link a quotation to that code. So you
Okay.
can create a whole long list of codes, but in the end, every code should be linked to a quotation.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
Colleagues, I'm so sorry. I have to end the session now. I do see that there's a hand, and I really apologize that I'm not going to answer that question. The reason being, I've got students who are writing a SIG test now at 4 o'clock, and they've just knocked on my door. So I'm really apologetic, and thank you for the extra time. And for those of you who do have additional questions, please email me.